have you been imagining? Have you been imagining your life? Have you been imagining our world? Imagining our community? Imagining your vitality? Do you have a dream for yourself? If there is a part of you that has fallen asleep to the idea of imagining for yourself, you are selling yourself short, because the power of the imagination is one of our 12 divine faculties. It is one of our greatest gifts, and it is sometimes underutilized, and sometimes we use it to the point of our own frustration. Has anyone done that? Has anyone had a vision that is something that you know is compelling, you know is something that's in your heart, but instead of being a source of support and inspiration, your being is pulled in between the distance of what it is like to be knowing and holding that possibility and it being far off in the future, or even possibly something that is just a constant source of longing or disappointment. Of longing or disappointment. Sometimes we can use the power of visioning to have an idea, to get an idea, to have an intention, to set it out there. But then when we actually think about it, we're stuck in the place of longing. We're stuck in the place of attaching negative emotions to it and being really present to how it's not here. Or of how much has to happen that seems impossible in order for it to demonstrate itself. So we're going to talk today a little bit about the concept of visioning and some places where we might fall short and where we can rearrange the practice to have a deepened experience of what it means to vision. But the first step in visioning, the first key piece, is that we have to give ourselves permission to be authentically ourselves. Permission to dream. Do you know dreaming is vulnerable? Permission to imagine. Permission to design our own lives and to live from source. To really do an inventory, a spiritual inventory of our own lives, and to ask ourselves sometimes the hard question of, am I in alignment with my intentions? Am I willing to be vulnerable, to take the risk on living the life I have dreamt about rather than living the life that I tend to just receive in each moment, that tends to just be here for me? It takes courage, and it takes living outside of the constraints we sometimes don't even realize we put on ourselves. There are movements, complete movements based on someone visioning a life that they imagined that they didn't see possible and stepping out of current systems and current structures to start creating it. There's a tiny house movement, right? There's the slow movement, the slow food movement. There's minimalism, there's living off the grid. Even Kansas City has made a commitment to a vision to be in the use of alternative power and to put practical steps behind that. I think it's by 2020, right? Is it 2020? I mean, you sit there and you go, really, I think it's by 2020. Because all you hear, right, is that's not possible now, right? So even when your mind goes, I think I saw that it's 2020, it goes, well, there's so many things that would have to rearrange. But you know what? The commitment was made, and then the activity to live into that commitment is now being generated, yeah? Go Kansas City and all the other cities that are stepping into that. I was talking to a beloved recently who took a trip to Iceland, a dream trip to Iceland, and she was telling me all about her trip and about talking to the people and how the communities were formed and how she had heard these stories, and then she actually saw the truth of these stories before her eyes. She heard that it was so safe, you know, the murder rate is like nothing, and it's so safe that you could have a baby in a carriage on the street. You know, someone could like leave the baby like outside of a shop, right, and then go into a shop, do their shopping, and come out. You could do that. You could just, run back in, get your keys. Things that you might think, I would never, in my wildest dreams, I wouldn't even leave my baby in my driveway for a second. And she was telling these stories just with this rich enthusiasm, this energy in her heart, where you could tell as she was witnessing this community that is Iceland, you could tell that her heart came alive there. You could tell that what she saw out there was like a tuning fork to something inside of herself that was a vision and a dream for what is possible, right? What the mind often does, though, is, goes into what, we furthered the conversation. It was like, once people show up, well, that's going to be gone, right? Once it just becomes this major tourist attraction, all that's going to go downhill. And I said, well, what if instead of it going downhill, which is what's common, right? Which is what's normal and ordinary, which is what is expected. It's like, it'll be infected by the virus, right? It'll be infected by the virus that we're all exposed to, that is some of this negative stuff that we have to deal with on the day-to-day basis. But what else could be happening? What else could be possible? The other possibility is that we could catch a vision. The other possibility is that something could be so dynamic and so magnetic that something could trigger something in our heart that says, this is how it can be, and I'm going to step into that. I'm going to bring home possibilities, and I'm going to start creating opportunities to create a like consciousness, right? The filmmaker Michael Moore, he's known for making these very passionate films, and a lot of people have opinions about him. They like him or they don't. But there is one film that he made that is almost like the Unity soundtrack film, and it's called Where to Invade Next. Does that sound like a Unity film, Where to Invade Next? It doesn't sound like it at the title, right? Because it sounds like you're talking about taking something from people or overpowering or creating dominion. But the whole film is about the most brilliant ideas, many of which started right here in the United States of America, but brilliant ideas that came from within people who were dreaming, who had imagination, who had a vision, and set forth from that vision a template that oftentimes did not get activated. And what he proposes in this film is that we start invading all the good ideas, invade all the places where these divine ideas, these great ideas, that's my word, not Michael Moore's, the divine ideas, have been not only visioned, not only drawn out, but where they have been lifted up into form, where they have been created and acted on. And it goes into these incredible journeys where you see, like prison systems where people that are, murderers are sitting there with kitchen knives that are like the size of your arm, and nobody's worried about it. All of these places where we can demonstrate high principles, and in demonstrating these high principles, it's magnetic, it's dynamic, it's causing a different reality to surface. Sound good? So are we going to give ourselves permission to live the life we imagine? Are there imagined constraints on your life and your vision? Are there imagined constraints on your life and on your vision? If there are constraints we have in our mind that we think this wouldn't if or because, they are imagined, right? Unless we actually ran into them, they are imagined. And so often we live through someone else's limitations. We live through someone else's prejudices, someone else's potential, someone else's struggles, even someone else's set point about what's possible. Oftentimes with vision and dreaming, we take off the wings before it even starts to lift off the ground. We also tend to, with visions, put on someone else's idea for us. Sometimes we get confused about our own vision and a vision we have inherited, or a vision that aligns with our education, our political system, our social system, our community, our family, our health, whatever it is, you name it. Our spouse. And a lot of the frustration that comes in the spiritual practice of visioning and imagining, I think, comes because we sometimes try to pull a vision to us. We see something that looks good, or we see something that's been possible, and we're like, well, I want that, or I want the freedoms that brings. And so we start visioning for things like money, we start visioning for things like power, we start visioning for things like freedom, we start visioning for whatever these things are that we see outside of ourselves because it looks good, or it looks good on someone else, or it looks like it'd be a great possibility. Like, I'd love to win the lottery. Who hasn't said I'd love to win the lottery? Have you talked to people that have won the lottery? Do you want all of that? No, maybe probably still worth it, But when we're in the spiritual practice of visioning, there's something that is critical and key. It is key that it comes from inside of us. It is key that it is ours. It is key that it's not just trying to see a picture and then become the frame around it. But in fact, we see a canvas and we become the painter. Because there is an idea in the mind and the experience of the painter. An idea that's already known. It's not something coming to us. It's not something that we have to find outside. And it's certainly not something that we have to hustle for or take from someone else or put on someone else's shoes that don't fit or start negotiating in the world around us and start getting in our ego about it to try to strong arm it to happen. But the reason it works, the reason principle works, the reason truth works is because it is self-existent. Because it is born in you on the day you are born into expression. It already exists within you. So instead of going out to get it, you go within to unveil it. And you feel it so deeply. And this might not have images and words that go along with human language, right? It might just be an experience. You might see in color, you might feel in feeling, but it's just something that you know in your heart, and you go so deeply into that space that you find a seed. You find a seed. And it is authentically you. It is something that you know in your heart resonates because you're not separate from it. This was the walk of the master teacher, I believe. I don't believe that he went out to do his teaching and had to say, okay, well, these are all the ideas of what everyone thinks I should be teaching and what I should be doing. And this is what my birthright brought me. This is what my parents thought I should be doing. This is what's needed by the times. He was authentically himself. He came from the prophet within, the deepest aspect of his self, and then he painted the pictures for others to see of what he felt in his heart, what he was, what he knows is possible. And it's not even like what he knows is possible, it's what is the truth that's already within and is the opportunity or the invitation to invite other people into that and invite the world of form to start out picturing that, to invite the flesh of the seed to start to grow according to its kind and its divine blueprint. We are all unique, unrepeatable expressions of God. The creative process is the idea of mind, idea, expression. That there is a divine mind. Call it whatever you want. Think about it, don't think about it, love it, don't love it, praise it, don't praise it. It's going to stay exactly the same. It is the mind of creation. It is the activity field of divine mind. It knows no religion. It holds no prejudice. Mind. The next is idea. Idea is that perfect form of everything. In the mind of God, it's the outpicturing of the form. It's the blueprint, right? The blueprint, the idea. And that exists as a seed within us. And when we tap it, we know it, and we feel fully connected with Source, with the great mind, because we are. Because we know it's in alignment. So we go, mind, there's the idea. I get this. This is me. This is not something I'd have to put on or try on. This is what I've always been. This resonates. I'm home. You know that feeling? I'm home. You know that feeling? I recognize someone. That feeling like I don't have to argue with myself about something. It just is. Mind, idea, and then there's the expression. That's the breath. That's the fruit flowering out. That's you, that's me, that's the visibility. That's what we're here to be and what we're here to create, what we're here to demonstrate. Sig Paulson said in his book, The 13 Commandments, "Let us now dissolve whatever remnants of the Old Testament philosophy we still hold, the belief that God is a power outside ourselves and that we are worthless sinners struggling to get back into his good graces. Let us accept the new covenant, the new understanding that the kingdom of God is within us, and that our work is to let that inner kingdom of God unfold, kingdom of God, kingdom of good, unfold and express itself in and through our thoughts and feelings and words and actions. Our thoughts, feelings, words, and actions will never get us into the kingdom of God, but they can express the kingdom of God when we come into realization that it is already within us. They can express the kingdom of God, and we can express the kingdom of God. Sometimes we fall short when we try to pull a vision to us rather than through us. We fall short when we have an old vision for ourselves that is either from someone else or from a former version of ourselves, and we've been holding on to it so long, we forgot to wake up to this now moment to see who we truly are in this moment and what is alive in us and for us in this moment, right? But that maybe we have a heritage of thinking that we are supposed to be something, but we are no longer that self that connected with that initial desire. The other place we sometimes fall short is thinking inside of the box. Instead of putting new wine into old wineskins or putting old wine into new wineskins, we reverse everything around, right? We take the new wine and we stick it in the constraints that are real or imagined. Sometimes wine just doesn't even need any skin. Just let it flow. Just let it be free. Let it be original. Let it be beyond form, beyond constraint. Think outside of the box rather than build from the common structures, rather than letting the mind, the creative faculty, and when I say the mind, I'm saying the mind that can poo-poo everything, the mind that can shut us down, the mind that can make us feel impractical. That mind gets activated and gets triggered when we look at what we see and we try to bring principle or vision to it, rather than allowing ourselves to be in the creative process. So there's a tool there when we start feeling like we have a vision, because we've all had visions. We all have aspects of our life we have a vision for. So when we start to feel that that vision doesn't have lift, that it doesn't have light around it, that it's not elevated, we don't even have to think about it, argue with it, or reason with it. It's just happening because the mind is getting jacked up by thinking about the current form and the current structure and how could I get from here to there. So our invitation is not to worry about it. Fear not, little flock, for it is the Father's great pleasure to give you the kingdom. Fear not, little self, for it is the divine's great pleasure to allow something to be birthed within you, mind, idea, expression. It is in your nature. It is your birthright. It is your opportunity that is always here. So step out of the worry and simply dive in to the feeling. Dive into the place where you know that seed, where you know your authentic self, and just enjoy it. Just begin to experience it. within and bless it and let that be enough. And like Kyle said earlier, don't worry about how, just be there, because the awakening in that space is more than enough. It's an awakening to your wholeness, an awakening to your truth, awakening to God, the grand overall design, the great oneness that we are all a part of. So step out of the distance or the longing energy and go back to what it feels like in the core of your being. When we do this, we begin to activate our creative potential and our creative power. I have a Unity minister friend who does beautiful work with visioning, and I remember one time her sitting with me and we were talking about jobs and, what you do with your living and with your life. And you can relate this to anything, relate it to whatever is on your mind. It might be health, it might be wealth, it might be love and friendship. It could be anything, it could be our world, right? And she said, rather than looking at the titles and the things, how much money I want to make, where I want to live, rather than all of that, get out of all of that and get inside and start thinking about how you feel when you wake up in the morning. What's next? What's after that, and how does it feel? And just start walking through your day. Imagine visioning for your occupation, your ministry of life, not by looking outside and going, what color is my parachute? What are all the things I could be doing? And, relate this to anything. Relate this to your retirement. What are all the things people do for retirement? Where are all the places people live when they retire? You know that there's a woman, brilliant woman, who was at retirement age, and she had as much money as she had, and then there's that tricky spot where it's like, well, what are the systems that we have created right now for my options? And she didn't like her options, but she loved taking cruises. And she realized that with the amount of time she was probably left on the planet, she could take an eternal cruise with how much it cost to live in some of the facilities that were near her. And so she booked cruise after cruise after cruise, and she lived on the ship, and she had room service 24/7. She had all the games and the play stuff. She had all the friends, all the companions. You want to go visit her? Go hop on the cruise. She thought outside of the box. She visioned. Right? We can think about how we want to feel in our days. Just get back into the feeling level, right? We are part of a lineage of beings that have been and will continue to be expressions of God, no matter how our language develops, no matter how technology develops. Like, the first feet on this planet didn't have advanced thinking of all the things they could do, right? All we are is nature expressing itself, is God rolling into itself and expressing itself over and over again. That's not a head process. That's a heart process. Will you give yourself permission to dive into your heart with anything and everything that is on it? Let's lift up this work of transformation. There was a TED Talk by Rutger Bregman about the power of a vision. And he said this: it's not enough to know what we're against, which is what the mind starts to do, which is what many of us know. We know a lot about what we're against, don't we? He said it's not enough to know what we're against. We need to also be for something. Martin Luther King didn't say, I have a nightmare. He had a dream. And then he shares, he says, so here's my dream. I believe in a future where the value of your life is not determined by the size of your paycheck and the amount of happiness you get and you spend. The amount of meaning you get is more tied in. He said, I believe in a future where the point of education is not to prepare you for a useless job, but for a life well lived. And he goes on and on. What do you believe? And are you willing to go straight to the heart, to sit with it, to sit with that seed and allow that fruit to grow? When it's authentic, when it's real, when it's true, it is expansive, it is demonstrated, it is present. Namaste.